If we really look at Ozempic and how it works mechanistically within the body, and then we look at something like a lower carb protocol or metabolic flexibility dietary protocol, and how that works mechanistically, we see that there are some eerie similarities. So how do they actually stack up against one another? It's pretty surprising when you actually look at the literature. But this isn't just going to be a comparison video. We're going to talk about how you can intertwine things, how you could use things appropriately, and some really solid strategies. Let's jump right in. We're going to talk about hunger and satiety first, Ozempic versus lower carb protocols. So first we look at a crossover design study in diabetes, obesity, and metabolism. This was a study where they escalated a dose up to 1 milligram per week with a GLP-1, with Ozempic, for a course of 12 weeks. That's actually not a tremendously high dose, so just a moderate dose of Ozempic. Now, of course, they compared this to just a regular control group. Now with this, they found that people that were administered Ozempic ate about 300 calories less with lunch and a little bit more than that with dinner, ultimately leading to about a 725 calorie deficit compared to control. So they were eating significantly less, 725 calories less than the control group. That is a significant amount of calories less. Now, the limitation with this study is they didn't have a whole lot of dietary intervention. It was just all ad libitum, eat whatever you want. Now, what they found with this was that there was less fatty food preference, which could be very, very beneficial for people that are trying to lose a lot of weight, and a total of about 5 kilograms of fat mass lost. So that's really nothing to sneeze at. And believe it or not, the muscle loss wasn't over the top. So I know there's a lot of kind of bashing Ozempic, talking about the muscle loss, and that can be a very real thing, but that is very dependent on the person and their lifestyle. But now let's look at how low carb or even a ketogenic diet compares to this, because it's quite fascinating. So with this, we look at a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. It took a look at a higher protein low carb diet. So in this case, it was 30 to 40% calories from protein, which is pretty high for most ketogenic protocols. And they compared this to a moderate carbohydrate diet, which was 35 or so percent carbohydrates. So decent amount of carbs. Now results in this were pretty interesting. They found that the low carb ketogenic diet did have a significant impact on hunger and satiety, to the point where they were eating markedly less calories throughout the course of the day. Now, the low carb group in this case ate between 160 and 200 calories less per day and lost about 2 kilograms of total fat mass. So that's about half the amount of total weight loss, a little bit less than the Ozempic group, and really only reducing calories by about 160 to 200 versus 725. But that's where we kind of get into this whole game of are you losing weight too quickly, right? So with the lower carb group, it was kind of interesting because they were able to have metabolic changes that actually occurred, whereas the Ozempic group maybe didn't have the same metabolic changes. So with this, we need to look a little bit more at actual fat loss and visceral fat loss. So let's get into that next. So with this, we look at a study published in the Journal of the Endocrine Society. This actually looked at 1,961 people, and it was a 68-week, pretty large-scale study looking at people that were on GLP-1 receptor agonists. So with this, they compared an Ozempic group to, once again, a placebo group or a control group. The Ozempic group did a higher dose. In this case, they were on average 2 to 2.4 milligrams per week, so pretty decent dose. But what was interesting about this study is they actually included dietary and lifestyle intervention too. So they controlled a little bit more of their diet, they controlled their lifestyle, they helped them actually establish a longer term plan, which was great. Now both groups at the end of 68 weeks lost fat. The Ozempic group lost about 15% total fat mass, which was great, and the dietary intervention and lifestyle intervention group lost between 3 and 4%, so with no drug at all. So yeah, we know based on this, Ozempic definitely plays a role, but the cool thing about this is because there was more lifestyle intervention, there's a good chance that the people that were using Ozempic were able to maintain things. Because one of the major drawbacks that we face with Ozempic is that it comes so easy for people to lose weight just by restricting calories that it's really hard for them to actually establish a new pattern. So, you kind of borrow from tomorrow for today in some ways. But anyhow, let's keep digging in. Let's look at the low carb diet and see how that stacked up. But before we look at the low carb diet, what was really interesting is that there was a 24.7% reduction in visceral fat. This is where I get a little torn up. I don't like people just hopping on Ozempic for the sake of hopping on it. But man, at the other side of the equation, I look at this and I say, if someone can have a 25% reduction in their visceral fat mass, now hopefully they don't gain it back, but that is a massive reduction in inflammation and dangerous, like seriously lethal fat that's on their body. So if someone is very overweight and they need to use this to get over the hump, I really understand. And I don't have any dog in this fight. I just see that as, well, maybe this helps them, but they have to be able to maintain it, right? So it's really important. That's why I'm always find ways to control your appetite no matter what. Okay, Ozempic is a crutch, and it's okay to use a crutch every now and then, but I recommend finding ways to, more attainable crutches, right? One of the crutches that I use, for example, I sip on electrolytes when I want to reduce my calories. It helps me a lot. There's something with salt and the gustatory response, NST neurons, the whole connection. When I drink something salty, I don't crave food that much. I especially don't crave sweets. So I'll sip on the LMNT electrolytes. I'll sip on the ready-to-drink sparkling LMNT electrolytes. I feel like I'm drinking a soda and it kind of curbs my appetite. So you got to find those kind of crutches. If you're interested in those, I did put a link down below. It's drinklmnt.com/Thomas. And for those that are interested, that actually gets you a free sample variety pack with any purchase. So you can try them all out. It's pretty awesome. So put that link down below. I recommend you try it out. Let's move into this study talking about low carb, though, on visceral fat. So this study was published in Frontiers in Nutrition. It took a look at high intensity interval training compared to a very low carb diet, compared to very low carb diet and high intensity interval training. You want to know what's wild here? The only groups that lost visceral fat were the low carb group and the low carb plus HIIT group. So HIIT, maybe over the longer term, might help you with visceral fat, but it really seems to work if you're also in a low carb state. So when I had Dr. Sean O'Mara on my channel, he's a visceral fat expert, literally. He was talking about how you have to put yourself in this unique kind of metabolic state for HIIT to work. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do HIIT on carbs and have some benefit, but the studies are pretty solid that being in a lower carb or a fasted state when you do things like HIIT could be extra beneficial for visceral fat. But let's keep digging into the details of this study. The HIIT and the placebo group, so the groups that didn't do low carb or didn't do low carb plus HIIT, they didn't lose as much trunk fat, they didn't lose as much overall central adiposity, obviously visceral fat, total fat mass, and the groups that ended up doing more of the low carb and the low carb plus HIIT, they actually preserve more muscle. And there's reasons behind that. We're going to talk about that. The adrenergic response, the ketone bodies. So what's the deal here? Which one's better? Okay, obviously, Ozempic is going to drain visceral fat a lot faster, but we're talking a pharmaceutical intervention here. So what if you were to do Ozempic plus have some lower carb strategies so that you actually get enough protein and fat in and also do occasional HIIT? I mean, that could be a good recipe, but one of the drawbacks that we face with any kind of GLP-1 is you're so low energy, you don't want to push that intensity. So that becomes really difficult. So the mechanisms in which these are working, Ozempic, you're losing visceral fat just by sheer hunger loss, right? And sheer just calorie restriction. Whereas with more of a low carb approach, it's a metabolic adaptation. Okay, these are two very different things. Okay, reducing your intake is definitely going to help you lose visceral fat, and you might lose it fast, but you're not having a metabolic shift that is occurring unless you maintain that new weight for a really long period of time. The nice thing with doing it via a low carb strategy is you're actually having metabolic flexibility and fat adaptation that's occurring that's encouraging the body to metabolically want to burn this fat more. You're better at mobilization of fat. You're better at the oxidation of fat. That is a very important thing. So the strategy here could be, okay, if you are taking Ozempic, occasionally switch to low carb, higher fat, higher protein while you're on Ozempic, and make a concerted effort to eat as much as you can during that time. You're not going to overeat the carbs, you're going to overeat protein and fat for maybe a week or two to give yourself this surge. So your body still knows how to use these fuels, and you're keeping your basal metabolic rate up. People need to be more deliberate about occasionally keeping their calories high, because ad libitum, you're just going to eat less. But if you put it on your calendar, okay, I'm going to eat more this day, this day, this day, and make a concerted effort. It's like the opposite of dieting. When you're on Ozempic, you need to do the opposite of dieting. Point is longer term, low carb probably is better for visceral fat because you're actually making a metabolic shift versus Ozempic, you're just dropping weight. But let's look at some more stuff. From a sustainability standpoint, Ozempic can be difficult because it's so little effort. Because you don't have to exert effort, it's really hard to instill a lifestyle change. So people go on Ozempic for a year or more, and then they come off of it. They haven't really established a habit, so they're just gonna naturally go right back to things. They might be in a better metabolic state, but it's not gonna really help them that much. Now, if we look at that same 68-week study that was looking at Ozempic, it was quite interesting. They found of a total collective, like 17.4% total fat mass lost, they regained 11-ish% back. So there was only a net loss of 5.7%. But that's still nothing to sneeze at. You see, we get hung up on, oh, they gained most of the weight back. If you go into it with the intent of, I'm not gonna keep all this weight off, you're probably still at a net positive. Like a lot of those people that maybe lost 5.7 total net, maybe they couldn't do that before. But we also don't know where it's gonna continue to go if they lost muscle, okay? So it's so important. We talk about this till I'm blue in the face, right? Resistance train, resistance train, resistance train. Yes, protein's important, but most importantly, resistance train. But when you're low calorie, it's hard to have the energy to do that. Okay, now additionally, what they found, which is the most concerning, is at 120 weeks, all the cardiometabolic benefits that they had achieved were back to baseline. Now, that doesn't tell me that the drug was doing magic for them. That tells me that they went right back to their old lifestyle. Because I also know there's other evidence that shows cardiometabolic benefit can be maintained if you come off Ozempic and continue to prioritize things. Now with low carb, you get some different benefits. You get the metabolic flexibility to where, once again, the cells over time actually start to prefer fat. So even if you came off that diet, you're gonna retain a lot of that benefit. There's true sustainability, but you also get brown fat activation, so you get additional fat loss that's occurring just from the thermic effect of the fat itself. And then of course, you get a mitochondrial change. Okay, so Ozempic, you're just getting mitochondrial change through appetite suppression. Okay, you can get true metabolic mitochondrial change without appetite suppression, without serious caloric restriction on a lower carb diet, right? So being able to use that strategically. So what's the end game here? What are we after? I think the goal really comes down to strategically either combining utilization of GLP-1 receptor agonists with keto, or maybe trying low carb first and then periodically using Ozempic if you need to really get over those humps. But most importantly, if you are using Ozempic, transition at the end of your Ozempic phase to low carb and remain low carb for a period afterwards to maintain muscle preservation. So check this out. Here's some of the stuff that could happen if you combine low carb with GLP-1. If you reduce carbohydrates while you're on a GLP-1, what's going to happen is you're going to naturally prioritize protein and fat. Now, if you are not doing that, most people on an Ozempic diet or Ozempic protocol gravitate towards carbs and processed food. Okay, they do not prioritize protein and fat because you lose your appetite for fat. So this would sort of encourage you, force you to eat the right macros. So that in and of itself is probably the most important thing. But there was a study that was published in Nutrition and Metabolism that really pointed out how lower carb preserves muscle and has some huge benefits. You really would preserve muscle more. So one, there's an adrenergic stimulation. So you're actually preserving muscle through this adrenergic pathway. This is essentially inhibiting muscle protein breakdown. You're in a slightly stressed phase to where your muscle actually is preserved. The presence of ketone bodies, it would be so easy to produce ketones while you are on something like Ozempic because your calories are so low. So it's gonna go up so quick, and ketones are extremely muscle sparing. Okay, so you preserve a lot more muscle. There's also a big boost in growth hormone that occurs. This is again, a muscle sparing effect. It prevents muscle protein breakdown. So you can actually capitalize on this. It's really important. So huge benefits. If you are going on a GLP-1, go low carb. Don't use it as a crutch to just take your existing lifestyle and shrink it. No, use it as a chance to try a new lifestyle with added benefit and potential for better adaptation to that lifestyle. There was also a study published in Exercise and Sports Science Reviews that took a look at a low carb diet and found that there was this activation of what's called PPAR. Now, this changes the cellular structure to prefer fats. If you prefer fats and you're in a deficit, imagine what's going to happen. Imagine what would happen while you are on this extreme deficit induced by Ozempic, while you are having an actual shift in your cellular structure and demand. Not only are you going to get more fat loss out of it, but you're going to preserve more muscle. And when you come off, not only are you going to have metabolic flexibility, but you're going to have metabolic flexibility with more weight loss, making it easier to transition without a massive rebound. So this isn't me endorsing Ozempic. This is me being real. People are going to use Ozempic. I think it has its benefits. I think we need to know how to intertwine lifestyle with it. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. See you tomorrow.